But the problem is that to explain this Sikha, we need some outside common perspective. And I need to warn you in advance that this perspective is not popular. And not only is it not popular, but many Chabad teachers would skirt around a lot of this and not mention it for very good reasons. That you don't want to turn people off. The whole idea of learning Chabad Hasidus is to makarav Yidden to Torah, to bring Jews closer to Torah, and to bring them closer to an understanding of what their life is about and how to improve their life and improve the life of everyone around them, the community. And so if you go thundering things that are unpopular, it can be conceived as counterproductive. The difficulty with that is that Torah is the wisdom of Hashem, and it's nitzchis, as we said, it's eternal. It applies to every Jew in every generation. And so what do you do with fashionable belief which exists in contradiction to what the Torah says? And it's a difficulty because when that contradiction is supported by our Yetzer Haras, and we've all got it, we've all got a driving animal soul which lusts for pleasure and runs away from pain, very normal. So we become experts at tailoring the pleasures that we want and indulging in the pleasures that we want, and we'll find every single excuse that our intellect and our imagination will allow us to do to gratify oneself. So all of that is normal, and the only difficulty is that if you believe your own lies for long enough, you lose sight of what the real goalposts are. So somehow or other, we have to strike a balance between knowing what the Torah says and appreciating its wisdom and fundamental truth, and on the other hand, acknowledging the fact that some of it is very difficult, and not everybody has the same ability to achieve the same level of success in doing so. So let's start before we start the Sikha, let's just do some general overviews. We live in a society which I think everybody will agree is one of the most liberal societies that since Greece or Rome. I mean, we know as a truth that if people repeat a lie often enough, sooner or later people begin to believe it. It's incredible. If you want to say often enough that men and women are the same, and your grandmother says, "What are you talking about? If I pick up a child and hold it upside down, you see its genitals, you know whether it's a boy or a girl, you know whether it's masculine or feminine." But all of a sudden, you've got a generation of kids who are being brought up to believe that it's fluid, that and that lie, that it's fluid, and if you call it a lie in outside society, you're going to be branded as a Neanderthal or a primitive right-wing macho moron. Whereas we who believe in woke, and we who believe in the various other fashionable points of view, are sophisticated and clever and intelligent. And this is a very big problem because there are many things in our daily life in society as we live it in 2024, which are fundamentally contrary to Torah. Therefore, they're fundamentally out of bounds, and the more one accesses them, the more one imperils his own soul and doesn't even know it. And there's so many comedy sketches on people who talk like this. They're called wowsers, and they're called Bible bashers, and people look for ways to ridicule them because the information's often very inconvenient. Very inconvenient for me, very inconvenient for you. If we're honest, it's inconvenient. But that doesn't mean that it isn't so, and that doesn't mean that if it's Hashem's Torah, an intelligent person should go away and examine why, if it is inconvenient, why is it inconvenient? And if it is inconvenient, then it's the person's fault for it being inconvenient. It's not the information's fault. So we're going to learn a sikha on this week's Parsha, which is Parshas PINCHAS. And in order to understand this sikha, let me run you through the story, which I'm sure everybody knows. At the end of last week's Sedra, when Bilam refused to curse Am Yisrael, Balak, who's a very clever king, said, I'll be able to fix it. How will he be able to fix it? He'll get the beautiful Midianite girls to seduce the Israeli guys, and now I'm going to say something because of the fact that I know that tape's on, and I know that people listen outside this room. So I'm not a Rebbe. I'm not constricted by a Rebbe's language. We are all mature men here. I'm not going to use synonyms. I'm going to talk openly, right? So I'm not so good at diplomacy. I'm much better at truth. Let's talk in truthful terms. So Balak was clever, and he said he's going to get these girls to seduce the Israeli guys, and before they climaxed, they would have to acknowledge Baal Por, which was the idol, which was the Avodah Zarah that they believed in. And that way, they would destroy Am Yisrael. Why? Rashi says, an extraordinary expression, he says, because their God, this is Balak's words, their God hates, what's the translation? He hates, let me find the translation because I've forgotten the word. Promiscuity. That's the English word. Soinazimo is the Hebrew term. He hates promiscuity. That's very inconvenient information for most guys, right? I mean, it's common knowledge that we live in a society where whatever works is fine. If you're not hurting anybody, this has now become a mantra. It's become a fundamental truth that everybody believes in, like the Constitution of the United States. If you are between two adults in the privacy of their own home and they're not hurting anybody else, it's nobody's business. And it probably isn't anybody's business. But the question of whether it's right or wrong remains open, because let's understand, first of all, you've got to start with the definition of right and wrong. What's right and wrong mean? If you're a Nazi living in 1939 Germany, it was right to hate Jews. Why? Because it was the law. And the Führer said so, and if you were obedient, then you hated Jews. So if you want to attach right and wrong to non-Torah situations, right and wrong is going to be fluid. It'll be dependent where you stand, where you look. In matters of Torah, there is one right and there's one wrong. What is right is consistent with Hashem's will, and what is not right is inconsistent with Hashem's will. And there are no other definitions. So if Hashem says not to murder, right, and you accept that what is right is to obey Hashem, because it's Hashem's wisdom that says that, then you're not going to murder under any circumstances. And let me tell you, I've often said it in this year, there are many circumstances where murdering is is a logical thing to do. You have a person dying in a nursing home in terrible pain, cannot be healed in any way, suffering terribly, and says to the doctor or the nurse, please kill me. I can't stand living. And if the doctor doesn't kill him, then he's worried that he's being unkind. And we have legislation now in 3 states of the country at least, where mercy killing is legal. Now, is it consistent with logic that you can do mercy killing? Of course it is. On the other hand, can you do mercy killing? Of course you can't. Why not? Because the Torah says you can't. So there's nothing it's not negotiable. The problem is that most things in our society are negotiable. Why? Because they're not accepted as Ratzon Hashem, and as a result, things are negotiable. And if you change the ground rules, things become acceptable. So the story with Pinchas is very inconvenient, because what happened was that these girls were doing very well. They were very successful. They were seducing a vast proportion of the population. If you want to know how many, it was 24,000 who died in the Megafa, in the plague, and then another 188 times 2 is, whatever 88 times 2 is, another 176,000 people died by the Bezdin, which we'll come to in a minute. So you have 176,000 plus 24,000, nearly 200,000 people. We're talking about a serious amount of human life, who all died because of this incident, which is an incident of sexual misconduct. So you're going to tell me that sexual misconduct is not a serious thing? So you can say, well, I don't really believe in it, or maybe it isn't exactly like that, or maybe there are separate circumstances for me. So I'm telling you, this information's inconvenient. But I got news for you, it's non-negotiable. It's absolutely Ratzon Hashem. So the story goes that the girls were successful, and Pinchas, and a guy called Zimri had a beautiful girl. She was the daughter of one of the chieftains of Midian, Cosby, and he was not only having intercourse with her, a Jewish man from a Jewish tribe, with a non-Jewish girl. He was doing so in open air in the entrance of their tent for everybody to see, and Pinchas came to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, "What's the halakha?" And the question that he asked him in halakha is that there's a situation called kanoim poigim boy, which means that a zealot can take the law into his own hands and be whatever it is, what do you call those people who roam the street? Vigilante. He can be a vigilante. Why? Because of the degree of this sin, which we're going to explore in a minute. So he comes to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, what's the halakha? And Moshe Rabbeinu says the truth. He says, I don't know. Why doesn't he know? So there are two opinions. One opinion is that he forgot, which most people don't accept, and the other is that Hashem withheld it from him at that moment. Why? Because he wanted Pinchas to take over. There's a whole background music with that, which we don't need to go into. The fact is that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't supply him with the answer, so Pinchas walks out with his spear, spears them through the genitals, the man through his genitals and the woman through her genitals, and holds them back up on his spear in front of everyone to see. And the moment he does that, oh, by the way, once the girls are successful with the Israelis, a plague breaks out, and in that plague 24,000 people died. But the moment that he spears them through the genitals, the plague stops. So that's the story. And the story, I mean, it's on its own, the story's full of, it could be a Hollywood movie, because of all the blood and guts, but the fact is that it raises so many problems for a person living in 2024. First of all, who gives him the right to kill them for having sex together? I mean, today, if you said that in the street, if you went in the street and said, you know, we learned Parashat Pinchas, and what's Parashat Pinchas about? About this champion, about this Rebbe who takes a spear and kills two people through the genitals and sticks the spear up, and I'm telling you this in his praise, and people would look at you as though you were crazy. I mean, who does think? How can you say that this has any merit whatsoever?
And he's a hero.
And he's a hero. And that's what I'm saying. And if you talk to the average civilized Australian person in 2024, he'd be appalled. First of all, he'd be appalled that there was any restriction on sexual conduct whatsoever.
That's for Westerners.
Huh?
If you go to kind of Middle Eastern kind of
Okay,
countries,
but we live here, so we're learning Torah for us here.
it's the Western kind of.
Okay, it's the Western world, yeah. They have other sins. Don't worry.
Too many.
But that's right. This is our Western culture holds that progressively over the last 150 years, every level of sexual boundary has been done away with, to the point that if somebody espouses a sexual limitation, they are Neanderthals. And you know, let's take one of the most common, what should be heartbreaking situations, which is so badly misunderstood. The Torah prohibits, for example, male homosexuality, right? Now, does that mean that a male homosexual should be ostracized, persecuted, ridiculed, given less opportunities in any way? That's got nothing to do with Frum Judaism. That stuff is animal behavior by people who simply don't have that Yetzer Hara. You know, there's a famous letter I've spoken about in the Shir before, and we run out of time if I do it because we haven't even started the Sikha yet. A guy writes to the Rebbe and says that he wants the Rebbe's answer on this, that he's homosexual, and he's a young man of 25 or 20, something like that, and he asks the Rebbe, what has the Rebbe got to say to him? It's not his fault. He's born this way. This is his predilection. Is it his is the Rebbe going to tell him that he can never have any sexual gratification for the rest of his life? Because don't forget that masturbation, I'm going to use all the correct terms, is forbidden for a man, not for a woman, but for a man it's forbidden, right? Why? Zerav Latala, which means that you're wasting the seed. What does it mean you're wasting the seed? That's a whole different parsha as well, because sperm is miraculous stuff. So, and to waste the sperm is a whole ganze meister in itself. But let's just stick to this. This boy says to the Rebbe in this letter that what does the Rebbe want from him? That he should never have any sexual gratification in his life. And this reply from the Rebbe, and honestly, if it's something that every person should learn thoroughly. Unfortunately, it's in Hebrew. It's a long letter, but the Rebbe says this. The Rebbe is so sweet to him, so gentle to him, so kind to him. He starts off by saying, first of all, I don't think I can answer you. Why? Because it's not my Yetzirah, it's not my Nesoyan, it's not my test. And there's a Gemara that until you walk in somebody's shoes, have the same shoes, you can't judge anything. So, and the first point that the Rebbe makes in the first long paragraph is that anyone who doesn't have your perspective and your needs, sexual needs in this area, they can't give you any advice whatsoever. All I can say, and then the Rebbe goes on to say, I'm not tested with this, but I can tell you this, that if you have this test, it means that you have a neshama that is big enough to deal with it, otherwise Hashem wouldn't give you the test. Otherwise that's sadism. Right? We learn this over and over in the Shia. So if you have a neshama that's big enough to be able to deal with it, the first thing you have to recognize is that you have a huge responsibility with that neshama. And the Rebbe goes on and explains to him why, difficult as it is, and he's going to fail from time to time, but when he fails he should do tshuva, but difficult as it is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because it's contrary to Ratzon Hashem. Now, so, as it's now 9 o'clock, let's go to the Sikha. But you need that background to know it. So, we start the Sikha, the Rebbe is really, I have to explain something to you. With the Rebbe's genius, the Rebbe is saying all of what I've just told you in background music. It's not what the Sikha is about is a Rashi. It's one Rashi, and really it's one word in one Rashi. And this is Champagne Rebbe. This is the Rebbe learning in full flight, where he takes this Rashi and he takes this and explains this and goes to this Gemara and goes to this Midrash and this Midrash and it's fabulous. We have no time to do it. I mean, even if we did it inside, it'd take an hour and a half, 2 hours. So you can imagine how long it took to prepare the shir. So but the essence of this is this, that there is, as soon as the Sedra opens with the words Vayhi Achrei Hamagefa, and it was after the plague. So everything that I've explained in the story is already known to everybody that's learning this, but the words are that it was after the plague. And Rashi adds the words, etc. And now the Rebbe wants to know why this whole thing has to do with a moshel that Rashi is about to give it, an example, and this word, etc. To cut a long story short, and that's what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be summarizing because otherwise it takes hours and huge acrobatics. But let me take you through what the plague stopped when Pinchas speared the two of them. And Rashi says, etc., and then says, and he gives a moshel. He says, like you have a shepherd who's got a pack of sheep, and they are attacked by wolves, and the wolves kill some of the thing, and I'm sorry, I haven't said what it says after the Magefa, Moshe is given the job of counting Am Yisrael. I didn't say that. That's key to all of this. I'm an idiot not to say. Has to count Am Yisrael. And the counting of Am Yisrael is conditional on the fact that the plague has stopped. Right? And Rashi explains why with the word etc. and explains that this obligation to count Am Yisrael, he gives a moshel for it with the wolves and the sheep and the how many are left. And the Rebbe wants to know many things about this moshel. I'll just take you through a few of them as general things. Number one, why should Moshe count? Who wants to know? Who wants to know how many sheep are left? Does the owner of the sheep want to know, or does the shepherd want to know? Moshe's the shepherd, Hashem's the owner. First, we're leaving aside now altogether whether Hashem knows or not. Of course he knows, because he's bringing the world into existence every moment. But the issue is whether it should be known to Moshe Rabbeinu and Am Yisrael. So he's told to count. But for whose benefit is the counting? Is the benefit for Hashem as the owner, or is the benefit for him as the shepherd? Answer, two different perspectives. What's the perspective of the owner? His wealth, his property. He wants to know how many sheep he's got. Sheep's worth $10 each. He's got so many sheep, he knows how much money he's got. What's the story with the shepherd? The shepherd's employed to do a job. His job is to make sure that the sheep don't die. So when he puts them in the pen at night, he has to make sure that the wolves can't get in. And if the wolves do get in, he's liable for the job, right? So the Rebbe is asking on the Rashi, why was the Rashi necessary? Why is this moshel necessary? We all understand there's been a plague, and Hashem says to count the people. So what do we need the moshel for? And if we do need the moshel, what does the moshel mean? Who's it for? Is it for the owner, or it's for the... Now, and the Rebbe points out that for the 5-year-old kid that's learning Torah, which is supposedly who Rashi's writing for, that there have been, it's not as though this is new. This isn't the first count. This isn't the first time Hashem's told Moshe Rabbeinu to count. He's told him to count when they left Mitzrayim. He's told them to count after the head of the eagle of the golden cow, right? He asked them to count when they set up the sanctuary, the Mishkan. And in those times, Rashi comments once, why does he ask them to count? Because he loves Am Yisrael. And when you love something and it's precious, you want to know how many you've got. There's no mention of any of that here. There's no mention of Hashem loving Am Yisrael, and that's why he's counting. In fact, the Moshel, explains the Rebbe, makes the whole question very much more difficult, because what was a simple question, like before when they counted before, has suddenly become a complicated question because you don't know who the counting's for. And then the Rebbe asks a much more difficult question. And this is all on 3 words of a Rashi. You've got to understand, this is 20 pages of huge depths of Torah. So the second question that he asks is this. I'll just give you this as the background. When the plague stopped, before the plague stopped, while the girls were busy seducing the guys in Am Yisrael, and very successfully, he sent in the best looking girls, the best So there were 88 Dayanim in the Sanhedrins of Am Yisrael, 88 judges in the court, in the courts. There were 3 million people. They needed courts. The courts that had 88 judges. Each of those 88 judges passed sentence on 2 men, 2 Jews. And that means that so there were 88,000. Did I say 88,000?
No.
I should have. 88,000 Dayanim. And they each passed sentence on 2 Jews. And part of Jewish law, part of halakha is that if the death sentence is passed, the Dayan has to execute. So they each executed 2 Jews, 88,000 times 2.
172.
172. So,
6 actually.
176. Okay, it's important to that guy, number 176, I promise you. So, what about them? What's this got to, the Moshel, what's it got to do with them? And if you want to say that it was after the interruption of the plague that the whole thing stopped, and you giving this moshel about the wolves, the moshel for the wolves is all right for if you want to say that something that the Jews were doing wrong hadn't yet been punished, whereas the 176,000 had been punished by due process. Can't argue with that. They've accused, that they've taken to court, they've given a fair trial, and they've been found guilty, and they get the death penalty. Okay, so you can't cry over them, Moshe Rabbeinu. We'll see in a minute why not. But you can say that from Hashem's point of view, or our point of view in history, what about the 176,000? Aren't they just as important as the 24,000, if not more? So the moshel is only good for the 24,000. The moshel's not good for the 176,000 because there's no shepherd there. I need to explain something else, otherwise that's not going to make sense. When Moshe Rabbeinu is asked about Kanoim Poigim Boy, the halakha of what do you do when a Jew is having sexual intercourse with a non-Jew, right? Now, as we sit around this table, if we weren't learning the Sikha, first of all, it's become totally commonplace in our society, right? And to suggest that warrants a death penalty of this kind, that there should be a plague, and that what was Moshe really upset about? Not that only that he forgot the halakha, but that because he forgot the halakha, more and more people were committing this sin, which modern society would not regard as a sin, but we learn as a matter of Torah was, and therefore more and more people died, and therefore his responsibility as the shepherd was not to let the wolves in to kill the sheep, and he was derelict in his duty. So he was very worried as to his role in this matter. Had he remembered the halakha, he'd have paskin straight away, and maybe he would have saved half of those 24,000 lives. And just so that you know, as a matter of background, these people weren't dummies. They weren't dumb footballers with, brains smashed out of them, and they're intelligent people. They came to Moshe Rabbeinu. What's his name? not Cosby. Cosby was the girl.
Zimri.
Zimri came to Moshe Rabbeinu with the following proposition. He said, "Is it wrong for me to marry Cosby?" Right? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Yes." And he says, "Why? You married your wife. Your wife was the daughter of the biggest priest of Avodah Zarah in the history of the world. So if you can marry her, why can't I marry Cosby? Who are you to say no to me?" Right? Now, the answer to that, by the way, just so that the story is complete, is that Moshe Rabbeinu married her before Matan Torah, so we didn't have Torah law, and this is 1 minute before they're going into Eretz Yisrael, 40 years after they've had and now it is forbidden as a matter of Torah. So that much Moshe Rabbeinu remembered. What you do with someone who's doing so in public, flagrantly, that he didn't remember. What is the law with that? That if somebody is confronted by a moral outrage of that degree, and then there's a whole lot of caveats on this, that it has to be in the heat of the moment, he can't take advice, and it has to be out of emotional level, then he can and must kill those people. Right? And that sounds so wild, and it sounds so primitive to us, because we live in a society that has taught us to believe that this stuff is rubbish, God forbid. But the key to understanding it is this, that the whole dynamic of sexual relations is an abused and misunderstood reality by all of us, everybody. And it's driven by our Yetzer Hara. It's driven by the fact that sexual gratification, as everybody knows, is the greatest physical pleasure there is. Why? Because Hashem is, it says in Kabbalah that when you're imitating Hashem at its greatest, in the greatest way, which is producing another Yesh Ma'ayin, something out of nothing. So a baby is produced from no life whatsoever from before. So in the business of making that happen, the body is rewarded with the greatest level of pleasure. But the whole question of pleasure then becomes something that we have to learn together. Because why is the guf rewarded with pleasure? So it's explained in Hasidus and in Kabbalah that the pleasure component in the physical act from the physical body is commensurate with the need of the Gashmias need. For example, food tastes good or food tastes bad. People love to eat, especially as they get older. Their taste becomes more sophisticated. They know what they're doing better. They know how to cook and trick up the food better, etc. So eating is a pleasure. But why is eating a pleasure? Because without it, maybe people wouldn't eat. And if they wouldn't eat, they'd die. And if they died, the human race would stop. That's true of all animals and vegetables. That's true of all creation, except for doimin, except for the inert matter. So animals eat to exist, and vegetation has to eat in inverted commas. It has to take in water and sunlight and be pollinated. But this process is a process to maintain life, and in order for us not to be too stupid to maintain the life, we have to be given as a dummy a reward to eat. Otherwise we wouldn't eat. Who would eat? It's expensive, it's time consuming, you put on weight. Who would eat? But when it tastes good, now all of a sudden every Tom, Dick, and Harry's going to eat because that's what he does. Now, we have a mitzvah of Peru Veru. That's one of the first mitzvahs in the Torah, to be fruitful and multiply. Who would be fruitful and multiply? Who would go to the trouble and difficulty of having intercourse with somebody and then having the progeny and having to pay for the progeny? And I'm a grandfather, Baruch Hashem. We don't count grandchildren, but I've had 4 children, so you can, and they're all from, so you can, Baruch Hashem, so you can work out that there are a lot of them. And who would undertake that expense? And we have a saying, Tsar Gidel Bonim. You know what that means? It's Yiddish. It means there's a pain in bringing up children. There's pain in bringing up children. Everybody knows that. I don't need to tell anybody that. So who would do it? Why would you do it? Somebody told me the other day that the cost of, if you have a child in Sydney, Australia in 2024, the cost of that child reaching 21 was some astronomical amount of money, with school fees and it was $1 million. So why would you spend $1 million? So Hashem says, you're a dummy. I need to give you a motive. So I give you a motive. I give you sex. It's wonderful. But now we have free choice, and now we have Bechira Chofshis. Now you've got it wonderful. So you've got free choice with your food. You can eat unhealthy. You can eat pizza every night and whatever it is that, or you can eat healthily. And say no to another ice cream or whatever it is that you. I heard once from one of the guys who was bringing in Sydney. He said, "You don't need shirim on how to eat ice cream. Ice cream you eat. Why do you eat it? Because it tastes good. Cheesecake you eat because it tastes good." So we are given sex as a tool for procuration, but comes with that a series of caveats. And those caveats are very difficult to keep for most of us. So what happens is that we invent systems of philosophy around it to justify it. And God's going to understand, and he didn't really mean it, and that used to be true in the olden days, but it isn't true anymore. And there are 613 mitzvahs. Let me do the first 600. Then we'll get to them. It's also a point of view. And I'm not screaming and shouting that everybody has to do anything. But we need to clarify the truth. It says that Torah is Torah's Chaim, means that it's the blueprint of life, of real life. And when you muddy those waters, you muddy your life. Whether you may not want to admit it, you may not want to come to terms with it, but that's the reality. So why is this sin so terrible that Pinchas is excused from taking the law into his own hands and being a vigilante and murdering 2 people, killing 2 people, and that killing those 2 people was such a virtuous act that the Megefa stopped, and Moshe Rabbeinu was upset. Why was he upset? Because he didn't stop the plague, Pinchas did. Right? And that was one of it's in different Medrashim, but that was one of the reasons that Moshe Rabbeinu questioned his fitness to take Am Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, because he wasn't a proper shepherd. He didn't keep the wolves out. Pinchas is the one who shot the wolves or killed the wolves or whatever. So what was the sin? So, on Yom Kippur, for Mincha, the Torah reading delineates a piece of Torah from Chumash of all the forbidden sexual engagements, right? It goes through male homosexuality, it goes through sisters, brothers, parents, mother's side, father's side, father's second wife, mother's second husband, whatever. There's a whole list. Some things that you would think should be mentioned in the list are not. For example, there's no prohibition of female homosexuality. Why? Because there's no zera levatola, there's no wasted seed. A man is forbidden from masturbating, a woman is not. If it was the reverse, if it was the worst, the women's lobby would be outraged. We don't seem to be outraged. But the reality is that of all of those sins, Rambam paskins that boil haramis, that's the offense of a Jew having intercourse with a non-Jew. Now, we're all friends here. We've got Russians who married first-time non-Jews, second-time non-Jews. I don't want you to, God forbid, think I'm criticizing anybody. I'm trying to teach a sikha from the Rebbe, and this is what the Torah says, and this is and all you can say is that you didn't understand that yet. And you know what? Even when you do understand it, who says anyone's going to change their behavior? But you got to know what it is. You got to know where the goalposts are. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. So Rambam paskins at boil haramis, where intercourse between a Jew and a non-Jew is worse than incest or adultery. Worse. Why? Why? Because, and this is deep. You can shrug it off, but I'm at the risk of you hating me for doing it, I'm going to tell you. Why is Am Yisrael here at all? What is Am Yisrael's role? We learn it over and over again. We are shluchim of Hashem to elevate the world and to bring ruchnius into gashmius. That's our job. And when we've done that job properly, we're going to have Mashiach. And there are a certain number of souls that are available to do that job. That's what the Kabbalah explains. There are a certain number of there's a fixed number of souls to do that job. Now, if a Jew has intercourse with a non-Jewess, and there's progeny, that soul is wasted because it's not a Jew. If a man has intercourse with his sister, God forbid, the produce is a mamzer. A mamzer is a very big problem. Can't marry certain people. I won't go into it now. There's a very big problem, right? The Gentiles got it wrong. They called it a bastard, and then they persecuted these people in England and other places. That's not Yiddishkeit. That's confused history. A mamzer has certain problems, but it's a Jew. If you commit adultery, it's committing adultery is forbidden as adultery is defined. You'd be surprised how it's defined. We don't have time for it, but people who commit adultery are very guilty of these sexual transgressions. But the child, if a child is born, the child's a Jew. The only time it's not is where there's intermarriage. And that's why intermarriage has been historically such a terrible avera from people. If you talk to a rabbi about it, he's not going to explain to you why. That's the problem. I reckon they should be explaining. The Rebbe isn't not explaining it. The Rebbe explains it. So if the Rebbe explains it, it's good enough for the Rebbe and who he's explaining it to. It's good enough for us to learn it as well. So it's a serious problem, especially if there are children. If there are no children, you've got a serious problem of zera levatola. And if there are children, you've got a serious problem that you're destroying a Jewish neshama. Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu is faced with the Megefa, with the plague, and 24,000 people dying, and Hashem tells him to count the people, what is the count? It's not the count that Hashem used to count and say, I love you, and because I love you, you're my children, and I love you, and I want to know how many there are, and I want you to know how many there are. And on the 3 occasions that I mentioned, for example, where there are countings, the Rashi explains that the reason is that Hashem loves everybody so much because we're the Amsagula. But there's no such mention of that love here. Why? Why? Because it says that the thing that Hashem hates the most, I read it to you, is, what was the word we translated it as?
Promiscuity.
Huh?
Promiscuity.
Promiscuity, thank you. What's promiscuity? Promiscuity in our language is a Jew male with a non-Jew female. And that's why Frum Yidden used to sit shiva. You know, son marries out, they used to sit shiva. Why? Why were they sitting shiva? People who don't understand said, they said, you're dead for me. They weren't saying you're dead for me. They're sitting shiva on the neshamas that would be created because they're not Jews.
What happened if she converted after?
Look, there are lots of halachas about this. There are lots of halachas about this, and I'm not here to criticize anybody or anything in that. There are lots of ways to rectify many things. There are. And, you know, and there are some very painful results. You know, I can tell you a situation where, of somebody that we know, the Sydney community knows, who was married to a Kohen, or he was a Kohen, and he was married to a Jewish woman, and they couldn't have children, and he went to the Rebbe. I think this might even be on video, I'm not sure, and asked the Rebbe, after 10 years of no child, you're not only permitted but encouraged in Jewish law to divorce, because you can't have the mitzvah peruvaru. So he went to the Rebbe and he said the truth. He said, I love my wife, you know, she loves me, but we want to do the mitzvah. What should we do? So the Rebbe said to wait. And he said, but it's already been 10 years. And the Rebbe said, wait. He wasn't a Lubavitcher. He came, somebody recommended that he come. And he was a frum man, and the people he had asked said, divorce quickly so that you can have children. She should be able to have children, you should be able to have children. So the Rebbe told him to wait. So he went back to Israel, and where they'd moved to Israel. Then he went back to Israel, and he told his friends what the Rebbe had said, and they said, well, that's not our advice. You do what you like, but that's not our advice. And these were solid Talmidei Chachamim. So he decided to listen to them, and they got a divorce. And she found that she'd been pregnant. She was already pregnant. And so now he wants to marry her. But he can't marry her because he's a Kohen and she's a divorcee. So there are some very cruel, difficult results, you know, in some of these laws. So when you say if she converts after, there are lots of details. At the end of the day, not everything feels good. We live in a society that says, if it doesn't feel good, fix it. Make it, let's all agree that it is good anyway. You know, but that's not Torah. And this whole sikha is about the fact that at the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu felt guilty, and he was. The reality was he was. Now, was it his fault? Depends who you listen to. If he forgot it, then it is his fault. How can Moshe Rabbeinu forget Torah? He got taught it by God. On the other hand, if Hashem withheld it from him, then he's not guilty. And the Rebbe gives another example of him not being guilty. For example, there's a count ordered when after the egel of the golden calf, right? The golden. So the Rebbe asks the question: is Moshe Rabbeinu responsible for the golden calf? He's on the mountain. He knew nothing about it. So as he knew nothing about it, he didn't feel any level of guilt but here it was on his watch. He was the man. He was the Rebbe. He was the one charged with looking after Am Yisrael. And looking after Am Yisrael, he shouldn't have allowed the girls in. And if he did allow the girls in, then he should have taken the remedy. If he couldn't help the girls coming in, I shouldn't say shouldn't allow, couldn't help it. How can you stop a nation of girls descending, beautiful women descending on your guys? And all they don't have a moral problem at all. They're saying, why aren't you walking faster? Come quicker. So, but it was on his watch, and that's what he was up. That's why he was worried. In the end, he's not held to be guilty because Hashem withheld the halakha from him. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that when you read the story of Pinchas, and it sounds like a brutal Hollywood movie, you have to know that at the bottom of it there are some very strong, fixed posts of morality. We can't marry out, and if we have, we've got to find a way to deal with that. You can't beat yourself up if you didn't know. You can't. The purpose of this isn't a criticism. The purpose of this is to understand the role of a Jewish neshama. The role of a Jewish neshama comes with a responsibility. Pleasure is not a good enough answer. Pleasure is great. Pleasure in eating is great. Pleasure in sex is great. But it's explained. The Rebbe explains in a fascinating long sikha that if the pleasure is incidental, it's kosher. No matter how good the pleasure is. Better it is, the better, if it's incidental. But if it's the main focus, it's pure treif. In other words, if you sit down to eat simply because you want the pleasure of that fillet steak or that cheesecake or the ice cream or whatever is your bag, and that's the reason you're eating, you got to be very careful with yourself. If the only reason, if you forget that you're a human being and that you have to be married and there's a mitzvah for Peru Veru, and you forget all of that and all you're interested in is satisfying your lust, you've got to be very careful because it's a problem. Your perspective's wrong. And I have to tell you, I'm not suggesting any of this is easy. It must be very difficult because our whole society is bent on doing the opposite. Exactly doing the opposite. They're trying to justify every pleasure, every madness, in order to has v'shalom criticize anybody. Anyway, so l'chaim.
Just do it.
I read somewhere like the fall of every empire comes when the line between men and women blurs or something like that.
This is